Kai MPC Live II. The original idea of it was that of Mr. Roger Lynn, the true genius of the whole MPC idea. The MPC just got an OS update, and I thought I would try it out and see what the experience is like. I still have my Octatrack beginner video loaded in iMovie, and I thought I would go task by task and compare the workflow to the Octatrack. So in my Octatrack video, I sliced up a single sample and did my Marco Lazovic Dreadworks cover with it by using the sounds 3 different ways. First, I used some drum hits like a drum machine. Then I used the house chord chromatically like a keyboard. And then I took the raw oscillator of my SH-101 and processed it in the Octatrack using the filter and envelopes to shape the sound. All this and more is possible in the MPC as well. And so this video will be a good introduction to the MPC for the beginner. So with the Octatrack, the first thing was put the sample in the Octatrack, and you can do that by accessing the internal memory card via USB. And you can do that on the MPC as well. For the USB drive access on the MPC, you'll hit Menu. Then you'll tap this MPC memory chip icon, and it lets you know you're entering controller mode. And in controller mode, you can access your SD card. And one important thing to note about the MPC is that it's running on a battery compared to the Octatrack, which has to be plugged in. And it also has an amazing speaker on the front of it. And I would give that speaker a 10 out of 10. I've never heard a small speaker bar like that sound so good. The speaker sounds amazing. So if you're using it with your modular and then running your modular back in to the MPC, it would make an excellent speaker for your modular system for sure. So now I've got the SD card showing on my desktop. And so I've already got mine in here, this Marco Octatrack tutorial WAV file, which is available free to my patrons as always. And I'll put a link for that. But you just drag it in there to your SD card and eject the SD card. And now hit the standalone button to go back to standalone mode. So we want to start an empty project, and you're presented with the main screen. With the Octatrack, the first thing we did was start a new project. So every time you start a new song, you're going to probably make a new project. In the top menu bar, there's a little file icon there. And then down at the bottom, you have a menu. And so if you hit save, you can name it right there. So we can just call it house because we're making a house tune here, and hit do it. You can hit your SD card there and save it in that area. Take it with you to any other MPC that you're working with. So this is a screen called main, and at the top there it tells us which project we're working on, the new one we just created and named house. And then there are 3 big sections there. The first one indicates which pattern you're on. It's called sequence. And so we're on pattern 1. The second one tells which track you're on within that pattern. And we're on the drum track. And with the Octatrack, it has machines, so you tell it which machine you want to use on the track, and that would tell it what you're using the track for. This has something similar to that. So you can use the track as a drum program, plug-in program, which would be the internal VSTs that a Kai gives you inside the MPC, keygroup program for like playing samples chromatically, clip program for Ableton style clip launching, MIDI program for MIDI tracks, playing external gear, and CV, which is great because you've got your modular system speaker right here, and then you can run voltages out the back of this thing and run your modular gear and have it sequence your modular. But for the first track, we're going to do the drums, and so we want that drum program. Then the final division there tells you where this MIDI is going to go. So like if we, in the second section here, if we're on track 1 and we record drum information into there, like hit certain pads and record that on track 1, then we could choose different destinations to send it to, different drum kits and things like that to send it to. And then over here on the left, you'd have easy access to things such as the grid area, which we'll get to. So with the Octatrack, we had to put the sample in a slot before we could use it. And there's something kind of like that on the MPC. So if you hit Shift Browse, you can get to your browser and your directory. And so you can look on that card there and you'll see the Marco Octatrack tutorial WAV file. Now if I touch it, I can audition it because this is set to auto audition. So I'm going to touch it and it plays me what's on that WAV file that we're going to use. And there's my SH-101 oscillator. And you hit load. So that's the equivalent of putting it in the slot on the Octatrack. Back to main. So on the Octatrack, we then sliced it up, and it took quite a bit of work there to get the start and end points right, and to slice that up and to get it spread across the buttons. Well, in the MPC, we're going to take that sample and we're going to spread the drum sounds across the buttons, but you'll see it's incredibly easy in the MPC to do that. So we hit Shift Mute, and you see the sample there. If you don't, then touch this title bar here, and you can, if it says none, you can just rotate it to the sample that we're working with. And then in the lower left there it says trim, but you can also select chop. And there are different methods of chop. There's manual, threshold, regions, BPM. Now if you hit threshold, the work is done. I mean, the work we did on the Octatrack of dividing the samples up and putting them on the pads and all the steps we went through and everything, I mean, it's done. So got the kick, snare, closed hat, open hat. Something was missing there. Okay, so it missed the rim tap, and it's got it with slice 5. And that's not a problem because you can just zoom in, pinch and zoom type of thing. So it missed that sample right there. You can just take that endpoint, hit that 5. Now we can take that red endpoint and put it right there. And now 6, we hit that. You can just drag these things around, or you can use these Q-Link encoders right here. And there's 4 pages of those, so there's 16 effectively encoders that work for various functions. You can tell what they do by touching them, and it'll tell you what they're set up to do. All right, so I think I just fixed it there just by dragging around the start and end points. So kick, snare, closed hat, open hat, and there it is. Rim tap by itself, cowbell by itself. Hold down Shift and hit Convert and do it. And now when you go back to main, it's still not ready to go. Hit the pads and you're like, it's still not here. Well, now this makes sense though, that you would have to tell it where you want this MIDI that we're about to play in on the pads, where you want that MIDI sent to. So we want that sent to that sample. So it all makes sense except for the sample edit. I mean, for a new user, you wouldn't realize that you needed to hit Shift and convert that. But typically, you know, with the drum pattern, you see lights there and stuff, and you can add that. Just go Menu, let's go to Menu, Pad Color. You can make it empty pads off and make that your default. Do it. Back to main. So now, might not be able to see that very well. Turn that off. You see only the pads that have information in there are lit. So we got the chopping done and we're about ready to record, but let's say we hit that kick and we say that doesn't really sound as clicky as the original. Well, we're not stuck. Just because those are chops, we're not stuck with that. We can have one be different than the others. Click Assign Samples here, and that's the one there that we want to change to something else. And so you can go to Browse, and I've got this vintage kick in there. If I hit load right now in this situation, it's going to load it in there. And so now if I go back to main, it's that more clicky kick. Sounds a little closer to what I want. Now with the Octatrack, I think the next step I talked about was the metronome that you might want to turn on and the bars. So this will probably sound better at 4 bars, so that's where you change that to 4 bars. And then here's the metronome, and it's good to have it on record and play when you start out, and there's no other information in there to keep you on beat. Then as far as the quantization, it's here, this TC button. And you can set up the quantization. I have it on 1/16, and it's turned on. It's going to keep me on beat. So those were the preliminary things that we did on the Octatrack before recording. Now I like to use overdub on this, so if you just light up overdub, now it has both play and play start. Play starts playing from where you are, where you stopped it at, and play start goes back to the beginning. So if I hit play start, and it gave me a little count in there. And so we're rolling back around to the 1. And put some snares in. Now, so there's a little problem there. One of my snares was off. So if you go here to this grid, you can kind of see where all the snares came down. So there's the culprit right there. I see it. And if I hit this little selection thing and go like that, now I've just got the 1 selected. I can just use the encoder to move it over. Assuming quantizations, it'll just pop over. Now back to main, and that should be on beat. But I heard something else. I don't know if you caught that, but it's not playing polyphonically. In other words, each sample that starts, it's cutting the other one off. And I don't want that to happen. So if I hit menu, program, edit, we can adjust this to as much polyphony as we need. So now the 808 keeps playing when the snare hits, but we want the hi-hats to cut each other off. So what you do is you notice up here at the top in the red, that is changing. It's telling me the name of the pad. So A3 and A4 are hi-hats, so they need to cut each other off. So you hit A3 and touch right there and put that in mute group 1, and A4 also in mute group 1. So now they can't play at the same time. So that's the old choke group. They're calling it here mute group. So the hi-hat pattern, you can have it play in automatically by holding down on note repeat. 2, 3, 4. Other part. I'm gonna undo that. You can undo that by hitting undo. Sounds pretty good. The original tempo, though, I think was 135, so we can adjust that right there. And I noticed that the master was a little hot, so you can hit mix. And I touch on it right there. That's the drum program. And you see it going into the orange there. It's a little hot. And now if we turn off the metronome as well, as we're going through this, if you want to save at any time, just hit this folder icon there and you have your saving options at the bottom. So I went ahead and recorded the rim tap and the cowbell, and here's where we are now. So on the Octatrack, when we got to the rim tap and cowbell, I put a little reverb on there to be like the original Dreadworks song. And the Octatrack allows 2 effects on each track. But you can also use neighbor tracks to use that track just for 2 more effects. And so you can layer them a little bit, but then you have to use a track to do that. But on the MPC, there's no shortage of effects. Each pad can have 4 separate effects. And there's lots of different effects to choose from, anything you could imagine. So 2 different strategies of adding your effects are to put the effects, 2 separate effects processors, 1 for each pad. And the other strategy to save CPU would be to use send effects. In that case, you'd have to have the same effect on both pads, which is fine in this case. And if you ever want to see your CPU usage, you can click on this chip right there, chip icon, and you see how much CPU is currently being used. And I tested it out, and it does use less CPU to use like 1 send reverb and 1 send delay, as opposed to putting very similar effects. So the way you do that is by tapping on the eye icon there. And you see in the top slot there which pad we're talking about. So here we're talking about pad A5. Hit in the inserts area, and I have an air reverb on there. I just turned it on. You can turn it on and off right there. And you can edit it with the little pencil. So I've just added that effect to that. And hitting that pad, I see A06 up there. Touch in there, turn that effect on, and that was another air reverb. But those had slightly different settings to try and approximate the master. So let me turn that off. And now we can try to use send effects on those 2. So if we go to mix, and in this drop down at the top, we can select returns by using the encoder. And you have 4 possible returns there. You go to return 1. Now we're adding the reverb effect onto return 1. Okay, the reverb is set up, as you can see, on the return 1. And if I hit mix again, I can see the individual drum pads there. And making sure that, you notice the send tab here has 4 different possibilities. So you got to make sure number 1 is selected, that first dot right there. And then you notice that there's an orange box around this, and that's for the Q-link. So if I hit the Q-link again, now the orange box is surrounding the 2 pads I want to change. And using the Q-link seems to move much faster than using the encoder. You can use the encoder too. So I'm using this first Q-link here, and you can see that I'm turning up that send. And cowbell. So it's sending out to this return over here, the first return. You have a choice of 4 of them there. And the thing to watch out for if you're using those returns is that your mix is on 100%. So you want a totally wet effect that you're sending out to. Okay, now we're done with the drum portion, and now we need to get the house chord out of that sample and be able to play that chromatically across the keys. And Octatrack had a special menu for that, where you could choose chromatic and so forth. And on the MPC, you'll touch there on track. We're staying with pattern 1 still, all the way through this tutorial. But you want to touch there where it says track 1 and go to track 2. Name that house chord if you want to by hitting this little text tool there and name it. And select it as a key group this time with the little piano keyboard symbol there. And make sure the program has changed to program 2. When you did that, it usually creates that, but if not, you can hit the little plus symbol right there and it'll make a new program. Go menu, program edit, touch the samples tab. If you don't see the sample in there, touch right there where it says none. There are 4 layers in here, so we're working with layer 1. And mine says none right now, but if I just rotate this encoder here, it turns to our sample. Single out the house chord there, and my microphone's in the way, so I'm having trouble with pinch and zoom. If you wonder why I'm having trouble, that's why. Then go to master, and you can choose the way the sample is going to play. 1 shot, note off, note on. So hit 1 shot. And we also want it to play monophonically so that one house chord can't play over the other. So set that to mono. And also you can turn this where it says full level, turn that on. So we're not dealing with velocity sensitivity with the house chord. Back to main, and we're all set up to play in the house chord. 2, 3, 4. Now on to track 3. You could name it bass by hitting on the little text tool there. Do it, and making sure a new program was started. So it's now program 3. This is also going to be key group, the little piano keyboard symbol there. But now we're going to use the envelope and filter to turn a raw oscillator sound from my SH-101 into the bass sound. So we'll process this sample a little differently. Go to menu, program edit, samples tab. Where the sample is, I'm going to choose that same sample. This time going to the raw oscillator sample sound. That's what we have. But this time we can process it a little differently using the envelope. Let's make the amp envelope, just open it up, 0, 127, 127, 127. But it's going to be the filter envelope that is closed down, so the cutoff at 0 and the depth at 127. So it's not going to make any sound. Put a little resonance on it, 18. And it won't make any sound if your attack, decay, sustain, and release is at 0. And you start turning the decay up. And turn the release up to about 74. And now going back to the amp envelope, I'm hearing a little bleed through the low frequency there. And so I'll just lower the release down a little. And you get that Dreadworks SH101 sound. Hit overdub and play start. 2, 3, 4. Tempo back up to 135, and it should sound something like this. So now you have an idea of how you might create a simple little house tune on both units. And if you're going from MPC to Octatrack or Octatrack to MPC, I think this would really help you make that decision. See you next time.